What are the most dangerous side effects of human growth hormone? How can we stop those side effects from happening? If we're going to talk about the side effects of human growth hormone, we need to understand why this is even an issue for our community being bodybuilders and athletes that use human growth hormone or possibly even abuse human growth hormone. So, first of all, HGH nowadays is way easier to make, not just in China, but in America. And these are in labs that are super cheap, but they're still effective. So if they're cheap and effective to make, obviously that means the price of human growth hormone is going to come down. It gets cheaper and cheaper every year, and the quality almost always gets better. So when the quality gets better and the price is cheaper, that means more people are going to have access to it. And if more people have access to it, it's cheaper, then they have more of an opportunity to take more human growth hormone. And that is definitely what they do. So if someone's taking as much human growth hormone as they can afford, you can see where side effects might come into play. So first of all, why would you even take HGH in the first place, and even at high dosages? Okay, is it anabolic? Now, if you look at the clinical literature, it's not directly anabolic. It's not anabolic the same way anabolic steroids are, right? So it's not directly, but why would you take it? The big one is IGF. That's not just systemic in your liver, but that's also within your actual muscle. That's the big one. That's the big reason people take HGH. The other one, anti-catabolic effects. That's a big reason to take it during a prep or if you're trying to just cut body fat for whatever reason. The other one is, now this one is more theoretical than anything, and you can see it in some papers, and that's that it's a myostatin inhibitor. I'm almost reluctant to even say that, but there is a little bit of evidence to say that. Then of course, the last one sort of goes along with muscle building is the growth factor. So there's tons of growth factors that happen, and then these downstream effects from those growth factors is what causes the hyperplasia and the hypertrophy and all this recovery and muscle building. So that's like the main reason people would take it. Of course, it's neuroprotective as well, but I don't think people even care about that. So, although they should, we need to understand the risks. And to do that, we need to understand how HGH works, just briefly. Now, when I talk about all of those benefits, that whole list, all of those things individually are not really that spectacular, but together, they do have a synergistic sort of effect in a way, okay? That's where the real magic happens. And that's where genetic freaks can really take advantage of human growth hormone when it comes to bodybuilding and athletics. First, the big thing to remember, the presence of HGH is far more important than the amount. Now, this took a long time for me to understand, but there's tons of evidence to support this. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people think you need to take a big bolus 20 IU dose. You can probably thank Dorian Yates for people thinking that, but you're not going to get as many benefits from that 20 IU bolus dose as you would from that 20 IUs spread out through the day, just sort of titrating through the day. Okay, and that's what I mean by the presence of HGH is more important than just a big dose. Now, the reason for that is it takes 4 hours to reach Cmax, and that is with sub-Q injections. Then another 4 for half-life. So overall, it's going to take 8 to 10 hours to get that half-life peak level. Now, if you're talking about dosing, people can argue about this all day, and that's fine. You would have tons of arguments to make as far as dosing goes. But to me, for most people, every 8 hours would be the perfect way to dose it. I mean, really, when you look at the Cmax and the half-lives, every 8 hours is going to be perfect. You're not going to miss anything. And then you're able to take full advantage of the growth hormone while it's in your system. Now, after you decide the dosing schedule, you need to decide the dose. All right. Now, 2 IUs is probably the best dosage to start at, mainly because 1 IU isn't really worth it, in my opinion. So at least start at 2. And that would be a safe dose, in my opinion. Now, if you're pushing the envelope as a bodybuilder or an athlete, 2 IUs is a good starting point, but when you push that envelope, what I mentioned earlier about the 3 times a day every 8 hours, that's where you can do 2 IUs 3 times a day, which adds up to what? 6 IUs. Now, then once you start pushing the envelope, you can move up to 3 IUs 3 times a day, so on and so forth. And then I think that would be able to make best use of the growth hormone you have on hand for what you're trying to achieve. Now, the most fascinating thing about human growth hormone is the fact that in the bodybuilding community, out of all the different drugs that people take, human growth hormone has the largest genetic variance of any drug you can take. As in, this guy takes it and he gets this positive effect, this guy takes it and he gets this positive effect, and it's just a huge variance. Now, on the flip side, the other thing that could happen is one guy could take it and get a side effect, and then another guy take and get a side effect, and one of them's side effect is way worse than the other. So when you're looking at this variance, it goes both ways for positive and negative, okay? But out of all the drugs, this is the one that has the largest variance. So it's the one that you really need to understand what you're getting into so that you can see what's actually happening to you, okay? Because when you get advice on something like this, especially with other drugs, people try to tell you, well, that's happening because of this and that. When there's such a great genetic variance in something that you're taking like HGH, you need to be able to understand what you're getting into. Now, I've talked about the dosing schedule, the amounts to take, why you would take it, when you take it, all that good stuff. Now we're going to talk about the risks. Those side effects are going to be very similar when they're listed on whatever website you go to, whether it's the Mayo Clinic or here we're looking at the Cleveland Clinic. Now, when you look at this list of side effects, there's a few that should stand out to you. Now, first of all, insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, those kind of go hand in hand. That, although those should be taken very serious, that's not the ones that I think are the most dangerous for us that I want to cover today. Now, the other thing, I don't think it does, it lists it, gynecomastia. So there's a possibility of gyno. Again, that's not a huge issue for most people. And then another thing that they don't list here, just because there's not a ton of data on it, is the increased risk of specific types of cancer, okay? Now, I want to be really clear. The next two things I mentioned are by far the most prevalent in our community, and it's not really if it'll happen to you, but when it'll happen to you at like what dosage. Now, the two are very much related because they both have to do with one of the worst side effects, which is intense mineral and water retention. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is carpal tunnel syndrome, which is the first thing they have listed here. And it's usually something that happens with everyone, at least the first time you take it, depending on the dose. Now, what causes carpal tunnel syndrome? It's caused, well, there's several things that cause it, but when we're talking about HGH, the cause of it is basically because of an increase of synovial fluid. Now, this is the fluid that's found in the joints, okay? And it helps that when you move your wrist, that everything goes through the carpal tunnel smoothly without friction, right? So there's some there, but when you take HGH, water retention, mineral retention, all that increases. It increases that synovial fluid, which pushes on the nerves, and that's what causes that pain. Now, it's very clear that that water retention does have to do with the synovial fluid, and that's what causes the issues in the carpal tunnel. Now, the other thing on here is swelling in your arms and legs, aka edema. Now, when you're taking bodybuilding dosages, which is anything above 1 IU, in my opinion, 2+, and most of you guys are probably taking 3, 4, 5, 6, it's going to swell way more things than just your arms and legs, as if that wasn't enough in the first place. So it's going to essentially cause water retention and mineral retention everywhere, which sounds cool. You get that cool puffy look, makes you look bigger. You do look pretty jacked. That's what makes you look jacked on HGH. But that's going to cause really high blood pressure. For some people, it's going to be like way too high to deal with. Like, I'm telling you, I've heard some crazy stories about just adding in HGH, blood pressure goes through the roof. Now, if you wanted to enlarge your heart, this is what you would do, and this is how it would cause it. Taking so much HGH that the water retention and mineral retention is so high and causing so much blood pressure. And then on top of that, you're adding in the growth factors. Your heart has to grow, period. So that's what would cause that. Now, it can cause nerve pains in certain places, similar to how it does with the carpal tunnel syndrome. And then, I guess the biggest point I want to drive home is that this water and mineral retention is it's a huge catalyst for just a number of heart and cardiovascular issues that you could have. And once it gets to a certain point, they could cause permanent damage. And that's really the biggest thing. Now, if you have these issues, how do we fix it? How do we fix these issues? First of all, you need to be sure that it's the growth hormone that's causing these issues, and it's not the androgens, because a lot of people, whenever they increase HGH, what else do they do? They're increasing their androgens as well. So androgens also cause high blood pressure for a number of different reasons. But if you're taking those and maybe you're taking an ARB to mitigate that, and you just feel certain that it's the HGH, it is sort of a different feeling when compared to anabolics. But you do need to be sure that it's the GH causing it once you move forward to mitigate these risks. Now, the first thing, obviously, is reduce the dose. If you went to a doctor and said, hey, I'm having these edema issues, I'm taking human growth hormone, what should I do? They would tell you to stop taking the human growth hormone, right? So that's like pretty obvious, reduce the dose. But I know who's listening to this video, and you guys are not going to want to reduce the dose. It's cool, I don't blame you. Now, the next thing you'll want to take is, I don't want to call it a shot in the dark, because it definitely can help carpal tunnel syndrome, and that's where this comes from. And that's taking ALA 600 milligrams, maybe even more than that, to help with any kind of oxidative stress because it's an antioxidant and it's going to make a really big effect. And there's plenty of papers how it helps with carpal tunnel syndrome, but it's not necessarily helping that water retention specifically, but it's worth noting and worth trying if that's, because it might just be just enough to where it helps with your issue. Now, if your issue is worse than that and that doesn't help, the next thing is an over-the-counter water pill, something with dandelion root. There's tons of supplement companies that have water pills that help you pee and get off water for peak week and things like that. And honestly, most of them are pretty effective. Like they do work a little bit. But if you take those and that's still not helping the issue, and to know if it's helping the issue, I guess I should say the first thing that would happen if you have water retention is your blood pressure would probably be high. So if you take these water pills and your blood pressure comes down, it's helping the issue. But if you take these pills and your blood pressure is not coming down, the next thing you move on to is HCTZ, hydrochlorothiazide. Now, this is, you can already tell by this suggestion that it's going to mitigate those mineral and sodium retention issues just head on. Now, obviously, you should go to a doctor to get this. And if you have issues, you should be going to the doctor in the first place. You shouldn't be taking HGH illegally in the first place anyway, but again, I know who's listening to this video, so I at least want to try to help you. So if you can get your hands on some hydrochlorothiazide, if you've tried everything else and it's not working, that's what you need to try. That's most likely what's going to help your issues going forward. Now, when you're going to use an over-the-counter supplement like dandelion root, or even if you go towards the hydrochlorothiazide route, you want to be careful how you use them because you don't want to go head on and just get all this water retention off of you and become dehydrated and get cramps. Of course, that's going to affect your performance, how you look, all this other stuff, right? You want to try low doses, maybe go one day, wait a day, maybe every other day. Be careful with how you take it. I wouldn't go straight in with taking it every single day. And be smart about when you take it too. Maybe take it at night, maybe take it first thing in the morning. If you train at, I don't know, 6 a.m., you'd want to take it at 6 p.m. so it's not close to your workout and you get dehydrated. Just be smart with when you take it and make sure it's effective. And you know, if you try those things and they don't work, I would just not take HGH in the first place. So let me know if this helped you out. I hope you found this useful, informative. If you want to see more videos like this, just let me know.